Hi, everybody. It's us again, dying in news with me, Reef, and my co-host, Collin. How are you? I'm sick. I'm more
Yeah, makes
sick
sense.
than I
You didn't
have been.
you didn't have to put on the weird accent
This one, I
though.
mean, whatever. You know,
Grow up and get
Uh,
serious.
I
yes,
guess. I guess. Um, you brought a story for us this evening.
I
If,
do.
if it's evening, I guess.
Yeah, it is now. It's when we're doing this, it is almost 8 Thursday. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, want to talk about Putin. Don't think we mentioned him too much on this podcast, but
Putin.
Putin has some dealings with Africa in regards to bailing them out. What does that mean, you may ask? So I thought it was very interesting given that we've talked a lot about Africa. We talked about the Africa summit that took place in Washington, D.C. I want to say it was in November, December.
Something like
Um,
that.
and we, basically discussed how the West is trying to cuddle up to African leaders in an attempt to, try and steal more resources from them, as if they already haven't done that.
Right.
But Putin is actually offering something a little more substantial that worries me. I mean, it sounds good on paper, but it does worry me a little bit, and I'll get into that in this article. But um, oh, this is forgot where this article's from. This is a new one. But I'll link where it's from
In the
in
description.
the description. But it's written by Sagar Kar, and he writes. I'm assuming it's a he. Uh, writes Russia ready to help African nations with critical products, over $20 billion of debt written off. Russian President Vladimir Putin has reiterated his country's commitment to meeting its obligations on supply of food products and fertilizers. So Sagar continues. Russian President Vladimir Putin has reiterated his country's commitment to meeting his obligations on supplies on food products, fertilizers, fuel, and other critical products to African countries. Speaking at the International Parliamentary Conference Russia Africa in a Multipolar World on Monday, Putin said that Russia is playing a key role in ensuring food and energy security in the continent. I should stress that our country consciously meets all of its obligations on supplies of food products, fertilizers, fuel, and other products critical for the countries of the continent, thus contributing to ensuring their food and energy security, Putin said. The Russian president also expressed his country's readiness to supply fertilizers to African nations for free, but added that obstacles are being thrown in their way by the West. You know that we are ready to supply parts of our resources frozen in European countries, including fertilizers to countries in need for free, with first batches already delivered. However, unfortunately, obstacles are thrown in our way here, he said, as per a report from TASS. Additionally, Putin announced that Russia has written off debts of African nations amounting to more than $20 billion. Russia wrote off debts to African states in the amount of $20 billion, he said. According to Putin, the mutual trade turnover between Russia and African nations is growing from year to year and reached almost 18 billion as of last year's end. The more vigorous transition to national currencies and financial settlements and the establishment of new transport and logistics chains will facilitate the development of counter-trade turnovers, Putin added. The International Parliamentary Conference Russia Africa in a Multipolar World is aimed at strengthening ties between Russia and African nations and promoting cooperation in various sectors, including trade, energy, healthcare, and education. The conference is being attended by lawmakers from Russia and African countries, as well as representatives of international organizations and businesses. Russia plays an important role in the international fertilizer market due to several factors, including its abundant natural resources, strong production capacity, and strategic location. Firstly, Russia is rich in natural resources, including large deposits of potash, phosphate, and nitrogen, which are key raw materials for producing fertilizers. Russia is one of the world's largest producers and exporters of potash, accounting for about 20% of global production. It also ranks among the top 5 producers of nitrogen and phosphate fertilizers. Secondly, Russia has a strong production capacity for fertilizers with several large chemical companies and fertilizer producers operating in the country. These companies have invested heavily in modernizing their production facilities and improving the efficiency of their operations, enabling them to compete effectively in the global market.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, Russia's strategic location between Europe and Asia and its access to major shipping routes and transportation networks make it a natural hub for trade in fertilizers. This has enabled Russian fertilizer producers to establish strong relationships with buyers and distributors in key markets, including China, India, and Europe. In addition to a strong position in the global fertilizer market, Russia has also been actively promoting its fertilizers and other agricultural products to emerging markets in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The country has established close partnerships with several African countries, offering them favorable financing terms and other incentives to import Russian fertilizers and other products.
Okay.
I think that's it for now. So, any
Well,
thoughts?
yeah, I've got a few. Because of what my father does, I do have some knowledge of this kind of stuff. Um, Especially with fertilizers, he moves quite a bit of that tonnage wise, right? And it's almost always waterway stuff moving this,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the amount you need to ship, like usually you're shipping large quantities, like tonnages, so it makes sense that they're hitting their like coastal neighbors essentially.
Mm-hmm.
It's partly why Russia fights so hard to keep ports open, right?
Right.
Because they really don't have that many like shipping ports, right? Like Vladivostok and like that they have some ones because of Crimea now, right? Like that's part of that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Because the rest of the ports are like you can't get in most of the year because,
Right.
above the Arctic Ocean. So, um it's difficult for them. So, making sure they have good partnerships with the things right near them, like China and India, is useful for them, you know? Um, and the fact that they're going to Africa makes complete sense, especially with this kind of stuff. I don't know what free means in this
Right.
regard. Like,
Right.
it's obviously not free because he's asking for particular obstacles to be, like, dealt
Uplifted.
with. Right. So, like, that is at least payment. So, I'd love to know exactly what obstacles he means, um, as far as that's concerned.
Well,
But
I would assume, would he mean obstacles as far as trade, given the
yes,
sanctions?
but like what specific ones?
Right.
In what countries with the what language? Because like that's all going to make a difference as far as like what is keeping those trades from happening.
Right.
You know.
See, this is where it kind of scares me a bit because
Mm,
um Africa already has, I'll say, a fairly decent relationship with China as it is,
yeah.
given the Belt Road Initiative, among other initiatives. With the addition to Russia now. And we've talked about, we've done several stories over the last few months of different countries and different African leaders expressing their sentiment towards Russia as very positive because,
Yeah.
essentially in war, like Russia has supported Africa. So a lot of these leaders have basically been like, we have no beef with Russia, which given the West and given their need right now to basically attack Russia and very soon China, that puts Africa in a very interesting spot
Yep.
economically. So the West isn't really offering much to Africa besides what? Like,
Army bases.
Yeah,
Um,
which acts as surveillance,
yeah,
mostly. Uh,
military
whereas
aid.
military aid, again, for what? Is more for
Well,
resources.
you got to keep the blood
Or
in the blood diamonds. That's,
right, right.
that's important.
Whereas, and I have said this regarding China, I don't necessarily have this pro-China sentiment, even pro-Russia to a lot of degrees, but at least at minimum, they are offering tangibles
Yes.
to,
Like here, have fertilizer to grow crops.
right.
Like,
And given, inflation, I recently read somewhere, I think even this week, the cost of living in Africa in general has increased drastically. So, and as many of you can guess, the majority of people, well, I wouldn't say the majority, but a fair number of people, as far as their livelihood, have to grow crops at minimum to support their own families. But then on a more macro level, to be able to, to sell to make money. So
money.
fertilizer in this case is extremely important and needed. So obviously Russia is kind of coming in um, to support them in that. So on one hand, but on the surface, people might say that's maybe good. Um, but I did want to pull up um, this tweet. This is actually from my DC council member, Zachary Parker. Um, I thought this was interesting because given he's local, like I kind of was like, dude, I mean, to be fair to him, he posted this on his personal account, but I was like, dude, you should probably stick to local DC politics right now and not on this. But several weeks ago, he posted this. A good read in yesterday's paper, Washington Post, on the global divide regarding the war in Ukraine. Some do not subscribe to the narrative that countering Russia is a moral imperative. And so the part in the article that he's referencing is this. That's not an argument that serious people buy, he said, citing the NATO bombing of Serbia and US support for dictatorships during the Cold War and Iraq War as examples of what he sees as the US violating those same principles. The rest of the world generally sees this as a European war. They do not see a global conflict or in the way it is presented in the West, he said. Yes, it has international repercussions such as inflation, but those repercussions are because of sanctions, which
Yes.
is what Putin
It's the
was
same thing
referencing.
everywhere.
Right,
Like South America too, you
right.
know? So,
So Zachary continues, move it. There we go. Russia is an imperialist power. Their actions are criminal and vile. Agree? Now, is America an imperialist power? Is it surprising, interesting even, that folks on the African continent are questioning America's moral standing regarding Ukraine given past actions? Totally agree.
well, also pause. Um, what do you know about how Africans are treated in Ukraine, first of all?
Well, I remember a certain story where, which really wasn't talked about on even an independent media that much. This was before INN News was a thing, of how, when the war started, that Africans who were living in Ukraine were basically mistreated in
Yeah.
trying to escape.
Yes.
So not talked about that much.
Yeah.
So
White women and
um,
children first. Like, it was
right,
pretty much, yeah.
right. So um, so we continue. The problem here, as I see it, is not that I find the article interesting, but that many in the West cannot step outside our own narratives to grapple with how the world views US claims of moral superiority.
Hmm.
Again, Russia is a corrupt, evil empire. Many in the West need to grapple with why so many think the same of the US. For what it's worth, I support the West's defense of Ukraine. Russia's actions and killing of innocent people are vile. I also know that throughout the African diaspora have complicated views of the US and the West for good reason. That's the point. Reading is fundamental. So I
Yeah,
mean, I love that,
he's just
but
not aware. if he is aware,
Right.
he's choosing not to, like, I mean, the issue is that, yes, war in and of itself is terrible. The fact that they think this is still innocent people entirely is part of the problem. Russia obviously has reasons, predominantly the bombing of the Donbass for 9 years and the
Right.
coup that we helped commit, uh, you know, like
Right.
Pierre Omidyar helped fund, like, so
Right. So yeah, definitely more liberal take in regards to Ukraine, but rights
he is trying to get
in
people to
terms.
understand why people also don't like the US, which, like, I mean, we've
Right.
been saying that for a while,
Right. So yeah,
so
I kind of conflated a lot of the pro-Russia, Ukraine sentiment there, which I don't agree with, but I do agree in his take in terms of, we have to look, well, Americans have to look outside the bubble and kind of think about in terms of what we have done and how the world perceives us, as we're not any better than the Russians in
mhm.
some aspects, which I do agree with. But again, at least Russia is offering tangibles to Africa. Um, Whereas in the US, we're not really offering jack shit. To Africans other than like platitudes of yes, we will support you and all this kind of bullshit. But at the same time, you're willing to start coups in Africa in order to exploit them for their resources.
Mhm. Yeah, Russia
So,
doesn't have a load of bases in Africa. Like, this is the
right,
issue, is that, like, you can argue that they're evil and vile. They've done 2 military engagements in the last decade, minus the Serbian stuff, which was arguably, really, that was them dealing with their own regime change caused by US sanctions to Russia. Like, again, that,
right.
it's anyway, you brought
So,
you brought this guy.
yeah, yeah. So I wanted to play this again. So I played this. I did this interview last summer, but I didn't premiere it until our first anniversary special back in,
Hmm.
was it November?
I think.
Also in the fall, this past fall.
Yep.
So this is my friend, colleague, mentor, Kadala Rani, who is based in Kigali, Rwanda. So, we need to have him on again at some point. But we were talking mostly about the genocide in Rwanda, which actually the 29th anniversary as of now will be in a couple of weeks, starting in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Um, but we ended up on talking about healthcare in Rwanda. And so I remember this was toward the end of my interview with him. I asked him, what do you think are your biggest needs in Africa? Well, I was speaking in Rwanda in particular to him, but you can almost translate this to Africa, like as a
Yeah.
continent,
Whole.
what are your biggest needs uh, in Rwanda? So it's just funny watching me now, like very much new at this.
Yep.
But yeah, I just want to play this part again for at least the last 5 minutes. Um, and let's hear what Ronnie has to say. So actually, I think that would be a great way to kind of end. So I know we've kind of talked about this
Yeah.
before, but if you want to share with whoever is watching, um, what do you feel like are the biggest needs in Rwanda right now that I don't know, like if people, like if there are people who are thinking about, hey, like especially given how Rwanda is kind of thought of like as a shining star in East Africa in particular, just as far as a lot of like the healthcare program especially, I think is kind of um like something that I think you guys are proud of. And I think that's kind of like
Yeah.
something that's not well known, but I think at least, you can turn to that as something very positive, that's
Hmm.
happening within your country. But what other needs do you think um, within the country that, that I think can be reformed in the same way, or like can
Yeah.
get
So one is I'll start with the good.
Mm,
The good thing is we have a system that works. We have a government system that works. And I know people have criticized us in many ways, but this is working for us as Rwandans.
mm,
I speak that with conviction. It really works for us as Rwandans in the country. So we have a system that works. You can be sure that once you invest in Rwanda, that you'll be able to see what you're fighting for. You'll be able to make the difference you want to make. Second, what we need. We don't need handouts. I think I've told you this before.
yes.
So
But we've
we don't
talked about the idea how, like, not a handout, but in a way that I kind of came in when I first met you in Rwanda, by having the mindset of, you know, I'm essentially a guest in your country, in your region. So me coming in and learning as much from you as possible, but then giving you all the forum to kind of teach me some things.
Yeah,
And
you know, this is what I'm saying. You see, we have a lot to give.
Mm,
We just have we need the means on how to give it.
mm,
Now, we have a few minutes, but let me get back to what I was saying. We don't need handouts. We need someone with the right mind and a right heart to come and teach us on how to fend for ourselves.
mm.
So
And
we need education more than, and I know, like, I'm taking my kids to school, but I have to provide some resources to help them make sure that they're in school, because I won't send my kid to school without a shoe and things like that. But we can help. We can help foster, but the heart behind should be, how can I equip the mind of this person that they won't depend on me always? They'll be able to fend for themselves. What's their gifting? What do they have? What can I develop that is already in them? Or how can I improve their education? How can I give them more knowledge so that they can, based on that knowledge, to be able to fend for themselves, rather than coming with a mentality, oh, these are the poor people, we need to help them, let's give them, you know, they need shoes, let's buy them shoes. But you haven't showed me how to make the shoe. Because I have a cow and I don't know how, when I eat the meat of my cow, then how about the skin? How do I use that skin? Can that skin become a shoe that I can wear tomorrow?
I enjoy it. I like it better than any.
Yes, Nancy. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted to play that clip because it's just a reminder for me when I first met Ronnie over a decade ago, and talking to him regarding this interview last year. He basically said, we're not looking for handouts. We're looking, essentially, we're looking for power. Like, we're looking for the means to be able to fend for ourselves so that we're able to essentially control our own destiny.
The production. Like, they don't want to give their resources away to someone else to produce. They want to produce it. That's why Zimbabwe wants to make sure lithium stuff is used in Zimbabwe. Not like, yes, I mean, this is across the board. This is happening in Africa. I'm kind of here for it, honestly.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And so I know Ronnie was talking specifically in Rwanda, but you can almost make that argument for the whole continent as well. It's the idea. And I mean, on one hand, they need to, you know, supplies. And Putin is providing them that. I can't get mad at him for that. But Africa has its own resources. Like essentially, you know, Africa is probably just as big. Maybe Russia, I guess, is probably bigger, but not by much in comparison
Well,
to
the amount of
Africa.
inhabitable land is different. Like,
Right.
you know,
But I would argue that Africa is able to produce more than Russia is in certain.
yeah.
I'm not
Oh,
sure,
for sure.
but
If
so
given
really,
if given the infrastructure, the issue is Africa doesn't
right,
have the infrastructure to do that. So
right,
it's
which is exactly what Ronnie didn't say this in so many words, but that's exactly what he was saying. We need the infrastructure. He talked
right.
about education. He talked about healthcare, but you can make the argument of
Yeah, you
that,
need
like I think
factories
textile
and
textile
right
production.
tools,
Like
equipment.
right, and having the education, and this is kind of where I get frustrated in terms of living in the West and having the resources here. Now, it's not to say it's great, but in comparison to Africa, Black people who are here relatively are doing okay. I would say argue very well. And at least we have, and I hate using this word, but we have better access just generally in terms of the education and infrastructure that we have here, that we should be able to support Africa. So it sucks in my mind that Putin and China are doing this where Africa should have the infrastructure where they're able to do this on their own and just be like, we don't need anybody. We're just gonna be neutral, like in whatever war that you decide to go into. Or I think at this point, being a part of the diaspora, that people, like me from Europe, from the Caribbean, from Latin America, from America, are able to kind of step in and kind of say, we can support, but we don't within the diaspora, we don't have that infrastructure either.
No.
So we can't support, Africans either. So it's basically like, rich white imperialists who are kind of taking over Africa and basically putting into this almost victim livelihood. Is like all these poor defenseless Africans left here, like in the form of charity, when, as Ronnie says, we don't need that. We need the
Yeah.
mindset, the brain power, and the infrastructure in order to make things happening for ourselves. And no one, and neither China or Russia or the West is doing that. And they kind of remain dependent rather, on these three imperialist powers who are
Yeah.
trying to essentially buy them off in different ways.
Well, and
And,
I think Russia and China are in a way they do that. I mean, they're building universities, they're building roads and bridges. Like
right.
they are doing that to
But
some
again,
degree. It's
but
the amount of
again,
like giving them their own power that I doubt they're willing to
right.
do at the end of the day, because at some point they want to again, they're trying to make friends. That's very clear that they're trying
Right.
to gain allies, and
They're trying to get allies, especially if they go into war, which again
yeah.
poses a problem for us because
Oh, it's
Africa
already a
and Latin
problem for
America,
us. Yep.
right? Because Africa and Latin America, well, generally the global South, are going to be probably in the middle of this,
Mm-hmm.
and more. I can imagine more resources will be exploited. More people will be harmed in whatever aggression that the West takes with Russia and China,
Yeah.
and Africa will be in the middle of it, devastated. So the support is good
Unfortunately.
for now, but long term, I don't see this to be a good thing. But we'll wait and see, I suppose.
I mean, Wakanda better put that wall back up, is all I'm saying. They better put that shield back up.
Yeah.
Like,
But
anyway,
that's all I
anything
got.
else? Okay,
No.
cool. Well, on that note, then, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.